Hey everyone, I'm Alika Lifty, and today we're going to make a commercial batch brew. The machine we use most often in our cafes is the Curtis G4 Gold Cup series. You can find really similar results and functions through machines from Fetco or Bun, all things that I know wholesale clients or people at home are using. Some important things to know about batch brew: we're making a large, even, approachable batch of coffee that we want to last a long time, be ready to serve, and be tasty to a wide range of people. The standard service size for a batch brew in a cafe is going to be 1 gallon. To get 1 gallon brewed, I need to do a little bit of reverse engineering. Here in this Curtis G4, I have a few different volume of water options, and what I have done is I have discovered the flow rate in this machine, and we have found that 3 minutes and 35 seconds in this Curtis G4 is outputting 4 liters of water. Now that's important because if I just brewed with 1 gallon of water, my grounds are going to absorb some of that and I'm going to get a yield that's under a gallon. That's not super efficient. So with a 4 liter volume of water size and a recommended ratio that we use of 1:16, I've reverse engineered that I need to use 250 grams of ground coffee for 4 liters of water to yield me 1 gallon of batch brew. So this is a really approachable ratio, it's a really approachable size. 250 grams, your coffee is going to absorb about 1.2 grams of water per gram of coffee. And so this retention actually gets us at 130 ounces of brewed coffee, which is just 2 ounces over a gallon. But by using 4 liters, it gives us nice, easy numbers to work with. Because 4,000 divided by 16 gives me 250 grams, and so I know how much coffee I need to use. Your ratio is going to be the thing that your customers pick up on the most. It's the easiest discernible feature of a cup of coffee, more discernible even than roast profile. And so I recommend finding a ratio that works for your community, that you like yourself, and adjusting from there. Say you want a 1:17 ratio, or maybe even more concentrated at a 1:15 ratio. You can make those adjustments really easily by simply changing how much coffee you're using with your machine and still yielding about 1 gallon. So I've set my volume of water to give me 4 liters. The next thing that's going to affect my percent extraction for a batch brew is the amount of pulses. Now, many commercial machines have set pulses, and that's perfectly fine. You can dial in your grind size and your dose again to figure out that flavor balance that you really need. With the Curtis and many other options, I have the ability to change either my pre-infusion or my pulse brew settings. To simplify this, the more pulses it takes me to reach that 4 liters, the stronger my cup of coffee is going to be and the longer it's going to take to brew. Versus the shorter amount of time my pulses take, the shorter my brew time is going to be, and therefore my total extraction time. And so you can kind of dial this in to find that balance that you need. As an example, if I split that 4,000 liters into 20 pulses, it's going to give me a really strong cup of coffee. And so if you wanted to use less coffee, as an example, you could get away with that by finding that similar strength by increasing the amount of pulses. We traditionally use pulse setting C on our Curtis G4. It splits that off into that 4 liters into 20 seconds on and 20 seconds off until it reaches that 4 liters. That's a pretty good balance we found there. Another setting you're going to find, and that's really common in commercial machines, is your bypass. This is water that's passing around the grounds, essentially. You're diluting your total beverage. This is another way that is great to stretch your commercial batch brew, to use a little bit less coffee or brew a little bit less, but still get that total volume. And so more or less bypass. On our large size or 1 gallon size, we use a 10% volume bypass. So 400 milliliters of water is passing through the grounds and going straight into our air pot. So that's a little bit about pulsing decisions. Our half-gallon batch, if we don't want to brew 1 gallon every single time, is 2 liters of water, and then I would use 125 grams of coffee. So yeah, let's go ahead and get a brew going. I've got our commercial filters. The waves in your commercial filters aren't quite as important as they are if you're making a pour over, simply because this is the casserole of coffee brewing. There's a lot of room for mistakes. So long as your waves are still semi-structured and keeping these edges from folding over if they were to get saturated with water, then the structure of your filter is perfectly fine. You still want to add your coffee and give it a shake flat like you would for a pour over, because we've got a spray head up here. And if my coffee bed is even, my brew will be more even. Insert and brew. So our 1 gallon batch with 250 grams of coffee and 4 liters of water at 20 seconds on, 20 seconds off pulses is gonna brew in about 6.5 minutes. That includes a 1:50 drip out time that just makes sure people don't remove an air pot before it's finished draining into it. So when you're dialing in your batch brew, it all comes down to taste. The first thing I do is taste for strength. If it's strength or ratio is what I'm familiar with or what I'm looking to present to my community, I change that primarily through the dose of coffee that I'm using. The next thing is flavor balance. If I'm looking for more sweetness and less acidity, then maybe I need to grind finer. Versus if my batch brew is a little bit more watery but really drying and bitter, I can likely grind a little bit coarser and heighten that acidity. But this is batch brew. If you grind at a pretty medium grind setting, you're gonna find really simple, really easy results. Batch brew is meant to be easy, repeatable, and approachable. If you find your brew is still pretty weak at whatever ratio you decide on, at that point I would start to adjust pulses. But for batch brew, I like to stick to a pretty standard pulse rate and not get too finicky into that. I found that changing pulses tends to not translate quite as well if I want to brew a batch of different kinds of coffees. So going from, say, a Colombia to an Ethiopia, I find the pulses don't translate quite as well if I were to specify to one coffee. So this pulse C with 20 seconds on and 20 seconds off gives us a really great balance, really great brew time. Probably the last thing we want to know about our batch brew, if you're using a insulated air pot like this, it can last up to 5 hours in the air pot and be perfectly fine to drink. What I recommend if you are just getting your batch brewer set up is to taste every half hour from one pot that you've set aside, just to make sure you know what time frame your coffee is going to either lose temperature or start to degrade in flavor. Otherwise, we set a time limit of about 5 hours for each of our air pots before we would dump it. So you've got a pretty long lifespan for your batch brew. But anyways, we've got about 3.5 minutes left on the drip out. We want to taste, change for balance if we need to, but ultimately you want a really enjoyable cup. Thanks.